Hey fellow freethinkers of Ireland, and welcome to Season 3 of Freethought Friday. The following episode is part 1 of a 2-part interview that we did with Michael Nugent of Atheist Ireland. So stay tuned for the second part, which should be available in 1 week's time. Enjoy!
When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs.
In all of science, we're looking for a balance between data and theory. You don't have to delude yourself with irony and fairy tales.
The same spiritual fulfillment that people find in religion can be found in science by coming to know, if you will, the mind of God.
The real world, as it actually is not evil. It's remarkable. And the way to understand the physical world is to use science.
There is a new wave of reason sweeping across America, Britain, Europe, Australia, South America, the Middle East and Africa. There is a new wave of reason where superstition had a firm hold. Teach a man to reason and think for a lifetime. Think for a lifetime.
Hey there Ireland, and welcome to episode 1 of the 3rd season of Freethought Friday. And it's with my new co-host, Ashling O'Brien. Hey, Ashling.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Ashling is going to be with us at least for the next few months, I think, for the next few episodes.
Yeah.
And hopefully well beyond that. And Rob said he may drop back in for a couple of episodes in the future, but he's very, very busy at the moment working on some important home projects. So, but we have a really interesting episode today, and we are doing an interview with someone I wanted to interview for a long time. And that is Michael Nugent from Atheist Ireland. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks very much for coming along. I know we're hoping to start this conversation a little earlier in the new year. In fact, in around the beginning of the new year when it was new, because one of the things we wanted to talk about was your 5 New Year's resolutions. So could you maybe have a chat with us about what you think is important to the atheist community?
Yeah, I think these are things for atheists and secularists that I think we should focus on as general principles for what we're doing during the coming year. The first is to oppose the word Islamophobia. Now, we can discuss in more detail why I think that's important, but essentially I think that it's a made-up word, that it's designed to silence legitimate criticism of the harmful ideology of Islam by conflating it with abuse of Muslims, which I think is wrong, but I think that criticism of Islam is important. The second, which is kind of related to that in a more general way, is that I think that we should promote rational and civil but robust discussion. And that we shouldn't stray beyond that into the type of internet rage that has been popularised by PZ Myers and people like that who seem to operate on an ethical system that I have in the past characterised as you have to be more ethical, you fuckhead.
Right.
So I think
so less rage ethics and more rational.
Exactly, more ethical ethics.
More
ethical ethics
right.
Based on compassion and empathy.
Sounds like such a novel idea, Michael.
Rather than waking up every morning going, who do I have to be furious about today? The third is, I think the word atheism is important, and I think we should be trying to normalise the word atheism. When Atheist Ireland started, about, how long ago is it now, 2008, we set as one of our strategies to try to normalise the use of the word atheist. Most of the uses, for example, in Parliament, before Atheist Ireland was founded, of the word atheist was people being abusive, referring to godless communists or slagging off atheists or in some way or other. Whereas now there were more references to atheism in 2015 in the Oireachtas than there were in the 15 years combined before Atheist Ireland was founded. And you'll find now that the word atheism in Parliament is more likely to be used when TDs or senators are reading from briefing documents that Atheist Ireland has given them about bills that are coming up, or referring to, if not in a positive way, at least in a descriptive way rather than in an abusive way. The fourth is promoting human rights as the basis of whatever we're doing. Atheist Ireland's policies are all based on international human rights standards, just very fundamental rights. And we're talking about things like freedom of religion and conscience of belief, freedom from discrimination, equality before the law, the right to private and family life. These kind of very fundamental rights that we shouldn't even have to be campaigning for. They should be the rock bottom minimum foundation that we should expect to have to build on, but unfortunately it's not the case. And then the fifth is what do we build on that, and what I suggest we should be trying to build is an ethical secular democracy, and both of those are important. Ethical because it's important. In fact, all three of those: ethical because it's important to do the right thing, secular because secular societies are better for people than our theocracies. Secular societies have better outcomes in terms of less murders, less rapes, less abortions, less of a lot of the harmful things that religion is supposed to protect us from. And then finally, democracies, because democracies are better for societies than dictatorships. Mm-hmm. So I think if we aim to promote ethical secular democracies, building on a foundation of human rights, using robust civil dialogue, that's the way that we should be trying to move atheist and secular advocacy.
Excellent. I know a project manager friend of mine, when I'm putting together my New Year's resolutions, would ask me to put a timeline on it, and seeing as they need to be done within the new year, are we talking about the ethical secular democracy, say, by the end of March?
I would say earlier.
All right, yes. Or we do have a general election coming up, so I'm sure we can vote for it, and it'll be turned around in no time at all. I tell you what, I mean, the Islamophobia one is one I'm very interested in discussing. But shall we maybe have a look at the others first before we go into that, because I feel the Islamophobia one will be quite detailed. Is the one you'd like to start with, or?
Well, I think the last two kind of go together. The last two are quite political, because what it's talking about is the principles upon which, and the foundation upon which you build an ethical secular society, and then the policies that you would build on that. Now, Atheist Ireland has been, over the last years, making submissions to and attending meetings of a lot of the international human rights oversight regulatory bodies that deal with the treaties that Ireland has signed up to. We're over in Geneva recently for the questioning of Ireland on the Convention on the Covenant on the Rights of the Child. We'll be over again in May when Ireland is being questioned under the Universal Periodic Review about all of our human rights obligations. We've been to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights Committee, the International Covenant on Economic Social Rights Committee, and then we also go to meetings at the Council of Europe and the OSCE, which is the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has a human rights meeting in Warsaw every year. So we go to all of these meetings, we highlight at those meetings where the Irish state is breaching the human rights of our citizens, particularly atheists and minority faith religions, based on treaties that we've signed up to. And we find that in a lot of the cases, if we hadn't been there, and indeed other advocacy groups in other areas of human rights, that Ireland tends to spoof a little bit, when it's talking to the UN, and say that it's doing things that it isn't. And it's useful to be there to be able to let the committees know, no, that's not true. Here's a piece of legislation that shows that that's not true, and then get more effective questioning. And so has actually the Irish government always had representation at each of these meetings? Or is there any they might decide to skip, or have they indeed skipped them in the past if a group like Atheist Ireland wasn't there? They won't skip them, because typically the ones that we will go to are where... Now, this isn't just Ireland. This happens for every country. Every 4 or 5 years under each treaty, the Committee of Human Rights Experts that deals with that treaty questions the state on a rolling basis about how they're implementing. And it's a fairly long procedure where they would start off by asking the state, how are you doing things? The state will tell them. They will then have a follow-up questions and so on. And during all of those areas, or all those sequences, Atheist Ireland will be in a position to contact the committee with our submissions, highlighting, for example, with the UPR, which is the next one coming, which is the Universal Periodic Review. It's one of the big ones where they're questioning everything. We're highlighting the blasphemy law, the the discrimination in the religious discrimination in the education system, religious oaths for high office, and the new claim by the state, which is just happening recently after we've peeled back all of their political justifications for religious discrimination, the fact that they're now arguing that the state is constitutionally obliged to buttress religious discrimination in the education system. And what we're saying to the United Nations is, if that is the case, then Ireland's constitution is incompatible with our human rights obligations, and so that's something that will have to be addressed.
And do you think... Sorry, Ashling,
I'm just wondering, when it comes to these treaties, before Ireland agrees to sign them, is there any kind of minimum standard that has to already have been reached? Or can Ireland just agree, sign a treaty and then work on achieving the standards?
Well, there's two types of rights. Typically, if you take the two main ones, which is civil and political rights on the one hand, and economic, social and cultural rights on the other. Civil and political rights are supposed to be implemented immediately. They're absolute rights. They're not to be balanced with other people's rights, and they're not to be achieved gradually. Economic, social and cultural rights, which are rights that involve, some level of decisions about state expenditure, where the resources are going to come from and so on. Those are rights that the UN recognises can be achieved gradually, depending on the resources that you have. But the fundamental ones, you shouldn't have that excuse. And then the other thing that's significant is that, we're all aware of some of the referenda that we've had to have for, EU treaties and so on. Now, the reasons for those referendums is that the state is saying, via their legal advisors, they're saying, well, this would be adding something new to our constitution. So we have to have a referendum for the people to decide that can be added to our constitution. But with the UN treaties that Ireland has signed up to, we've signed up to them without a referendum. So effectively the state, by signing up to them without a referendum, is saying that we already have those rights in our constitution. We don't need to change the constitution in order to vindicate those rights. And yet they are now saying that it would require a constitution referendum in order to vindicate them.
Well, now this is something interesting that you and I have discussed, Ashling, before. A phrase that you've used that I've actually repeated to many people. I think it's a great phrase. That following the marriage equality referendum and then our discussion on what's next and how many things come next. If this is indeed the case, then it's yet more ammunition for the idea that our constitution is not fit for purpose. Yeah. It's not fit for purpose either of a republic or its international obligations, or certainly it's certainly not future-proofed. I would be quite ashamed if this constitution is still in place by the time we got to 2037. And I'm starting to fear that it probably still will be. Yeah. Well, certainly at the pace at which they're going, and there's no discussion about it. I'm curious if this line is the line that this government or whatever subsequent government after the general election comes into power. If this is the line that those governments are going to take, how does Atheist Ireland try to combat that? Is it going to try and push the government on it, or are you going to take them at their legal word and go, okay, well then how do we strategize to get a referendum to try and change these things? Or would you see that as the route for Atheist Ireland to advocate? Well,
there are two different things there. We think that some of the arguments that they're making about particular reforms needing a constitutional referendum aren't true. We think that they can make some of the reforms without a referendum, particularly removing some of the religious discrimination in the education system. They're arguing that they're constitutionally required to buttress religious discrimination, and they're saying that the discrimination in schools doesn't come from the state, it comes from the religions, and that they're required to support the religion's right to discriminate on the basis of their beliefs. And that may well be the case constitutionally, but they're not required by the constitution to fund that religious discrimination. So they could say to the churches in that case, look, you can run your schools whatever way you want as long as you're paying for them. But if you're going to have state funding, then you're going to have to run them on the basis of our international human rights obligations. So we think that they're being either ultra cautious or probably just hiding behind the constitution in those instances. There's another one, like for example with regard to abortion, and there's a significant distinction that the UN Human Rights Committee made to the Irish government when they were being questioned a few years ago in Geneva about this, is they were being asked, why aren't you giving women the human rights to abortion that they're entitled to? Now, not an unlimited human right in human rights law to abortion, but certainly a right that extends beyond the restrictions in the Irish constitution. And Ireland's response was, well, there's also in the Covenant, there's a clause that allows the people to express their will politically, and this is what we're basing it on. The people have voted, and the Parliament has passed laws in accordance with that. And what the UN Human Rights Committee told Ireland in that case is look, that's a completely unacceptable reason to deny people their human rights. You know, you can't deny people their human rights on the basis of majority votes, or in effect what you're saying is you can have your human rights if your neighbours think you should.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to this, if it's a fundamental right, it can't be balanced by the desire of the majority to not give you the fundamental right.
Yeah, so essentially you've got in schools, if you're saying, they're saying, well, you have a right to not have your child indoctrinated into religion, and the bishop wants to indoctrinate your child into religion, so really we have to balance the bishop's desire to do that with your right to have him not do that.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's hard to tell.
We could indoctrinate or de-indoctrinate the bishop. I mean, we should have the right to do that.
Yeah, we should have the right to go into churches
and preach knowledge. Yes.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know whether are we going to have a complete overhaul of the Constitution. Who knows? I mean, that would be the ideal. I remember it back in the 80s when the Progressive Democrats were founded. One of their first policies was to write a new Constitution. And they in fact put in place, it's still there on record of, you know, the type of constitution that you could have for a liberal side, which was written by people who at the time were involved in founding the constitution of the PDs, people like Michael McDowell. So I mean, some pretty heavyweight people behind it legally. So it's, although one of the things that was quite funny about it was they passed as Progressive Democrat policy that there should be this new constitution, which included not having any reference to God in their new constitution. But they passed it at their national conference on a Sunday morning when all the religious delegates were out at mass. Maybe we could do that. Maybe we could have a referendum for a new constitution and hold it on a Sunday morning.
On Sunday morning. Then we do it at Master GAA. Sorted.
Well, that might work. That might work.
What do you say, Michael, to people who say that, you know, the UN has lost all credibility as a human rights body, with things like putting Saudi Arabia onto a human rights committee, and, you know, anything they say we can just, you know, dismiss from now on?
Yeah, that's a real concern, and that's a concern that I have about the UPR, which is the Universal Periodic Review, because the UPR is essentially the other states questioning Ireland, and then Ireland will in turn be questioning the other states under their UPRs. So it is the UPR is a bit of a political trade-off, and is something that particularly with, as you say, with states like Saudi Arabia, who it's been kind of exaggerated that there's a kind of spin that they're chairing the Human Rights Council. They're not actually, they're chairing an advisory body that recommends people for certain positions, but even so, you know, they shouldn't be in that. But there's a big distinction between the UN Human Rights Council, which is the body that has those political flaws, and the UN Human Rights Committee. The UN Human Rights Committee is a body of independent human rights legal experts, and that's the body that examines, is Ireland or whatever country, you know, keeping to its obligations under the various conventions. And so, having been over there at those meetings, I know from direct experience that they're on top of what they're doing, and that they will question the states rigorously and independently. And we've been in situations, for example, where Ireland has, you know, said, well, we've got a bill coming in that says that we're going to protect teachers, for example, on the against discrimination, and we then were able to go to the committee members during a break in the session and say, you know, ask them, does that specifically protect atheist teachers, which we know that it doesn't. And so they then said, well, I mean, they're not going to ask a question just based on some possibly over-enthusiastic NGO telling them something. So they said, well, look, show me the legislation, show me the evidence. And so we showed them that on the net, just on our iPads, and then they said, okay, we've got that right, we'll ask them the question. So they followed up, and we got a recommendation saying that you should remove all religious discrimination in schools, including for teachers. So the distinction I would make there, Ashling, is between the UN Human Rights Council, which is, to use a word we may be discussing later, is problematic, and the UN Human Rights Committees, which are more independent.
So that is, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done just in relation to the human rights, or in relation to the state and its obligation under human rights. Is there, when you say ethical secular democracy, is the ethical part, are you talking about human rights there? Are you talking about something else?
Well, we're talking there about the specifics that you build on human rights.
Right.
You know, in what circumstances should women have a right to abortion?
Mm.
And I have a very liberal approach, and that other people might have more restrictive approaches that are still consistent with human rights. But I mean, those are decisions that if we take away the Eighth Amendment, which enshrines Catholic teaching in the Constitution, that would then leave the Oireachtas free to discuss this issue, which is what should happen in a democracy. There's the specifics of what you do in schools. Like we take a very strong position on the schools that the state should be funding a secular education system, that it shouldn't be devolving any control to religious bodies, or indeed even to non-religious bodies like Educate Together, who happen to be a lot closer to our philosophy than the Catholic Church are, but who are still essentially a private body being funded by the state to run schools in accordance with their own ethos. And really there shouldn't be private ethoses involved in the education system. Removing the religious oaths, again, these are things that might seem quite easy. Okay, you remove the religious oaths. Some people will suggest, well, what you do is you just add on an alternate that you don't have to use the religious part of the oath. Superficially, that sounds reasonable, but in effect what that means is that you're creating two tiers of public office holders. You have religious judges and secular judges. You have religious presidents or secular presidents. You have and the Taoiseach and Taoiseach also come under this because of their membership of the Council of State, which also is these religious oaths. So particularly you don't want a situation where the judiciary is divided into, these are the judges that are religious and these are the judges that aren't. It undermines the whole impartiality of the legal system. So that in terms of the ethical secular democracy, it would be those kind of nuances that we'd be talking about, building on the basics of the human rights.
And I mean, that's when you're discussing about some of these things that we definitely need to change, and obviously need to change from a political standpoint. Do you see this kind of building of an ethical secular democracy purely from a top down, like from a political perspective, or would you see also a social element of it, maybe a grassroots element, trying to? Because I suppose politicians will always go, I was going to say where the money is, but where the votes are. And if people aren't necessarily caring about these issues or raising these issues, or even aware of the issues, then politicians will always use the excuse, well, it's just not something that's vote worthy. Would you see Atheist Ireland as trying to also build that ethical secular democracy from the from a grassroots up, maybe not entirely from the ground up, but maybe trying to encourage more people to think in the kind of frame of mind that many atheists
we do that anyway. We work alongside other human rights bodies that are going to these UN committee meetings and so on. We're also part of a group called the ESC Initiative, which is the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Initiative. We're involved in the campaign on the equal marriage referendum. We're part of the coalition to repeal the Eighth Amendment. So we do work actively on the ground with other groups who have relevant issues that we would consider fall broadly under the category of ethical secular democracy. One of the difficulties in Ireland, we kind of tend to skip over huge chunks of social development that most countries go through. We had when essentially with the partition of Ireland, we had a sectarian Protestant state in Northern Ireland and a sectarian Catholic state in the Republic of Ireland, and both of those developments kind of just distorted the normal political ideological divisions that you'd normally have in a society. So we kind of skipped over the whole left-right ideology and the type of political divisions that you normally have in countries between political parties. We have within our political parties. So each party will have its liberal wing and its conservative wing and its socialist wing and so on.
Monster raving looting party wing.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's the overall party. But so that's one of the things. And in similar vein, I think what we've done recently is with the massive lack of confidence that the public has shown in the Catholic Church compared to what it used to be, say back in, I don't know when it peaked. Maybe it peaked sometime between the pro-life referendum and maybe the Bishop Casey thing. and then it accelerated with the child abuse. But I think that pattern was happening anyway. So that's gone. The people have moved on. The people are no longer looking to the Catholic Church for moral guidance and as to how to run their lives. But what I think a lot of people have done is they've just said, okay, right, so we'll just ignore them and we'll just get on with our lives. And so they're skipping the phase of, let's put pressure on the politicians to change the laws that were put in place while the church had that power. And so that means that the church, although it doesn't have the power of the people, still has the power legally that it got put in place at the time that it did have the power over the people. So I'm not quite sure what the solution is, other than people getting more politically active and making it an issue for politicians.
Yeah.
But I think it will happen. I think it's inevitable. I think that's the direction that we're moving in.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely think it's inevitable, and I think the pace at which the push for changing the education system in the last, because it's not even the last year. Atheist Ireland has been at this consistently for, well, probably all 6-7 years, and I'm very much aware of that. But I'm now noticing the increased visibility from sometime in around September, October.
This year seemed to be particularly extended.
Yeah.
You know, it normally kicks in around the beginning of the new school year. I think this year we probably saw cases where it's been atheists and secularists and non-religious complaining for quite a while. But for the first time this year, I think we saw minority religions really being impacted and making the news.
Yeah,
coming forward. And I think people began to feel a little bit more uncomfortable when it's non-white people that and it's one of those interesting things where they can't see religious discrimination as religious discrimination, but if you add race into it, then they go, that's discrimination. Yeah.
But I think I hope it might signal a willingness to be engaged with some of the, some of those very issues that you're talking about that we kind of just skipped over. And I have to say, I too I'm guilty of skipping over many issues, in particular if the issue wasn't directly affecting me, and there were some issues that were directly affecting me, like marriage equality. I was just not even thinking about it, and it wasn't on my radar. And certainly they have become more and more on my radar now, and I'm now interested to hear what the politicians have to say about it, or if they don't, I would ask them a question. So I can't say that's going to be typical of everyone, but I certainly hope it's the direction in which we're moving.
I think as well that people are a little less willing to just accept. I was talking the other evening to a school principal who's an atheist, and I said,
they don't exist.
I said, how did you? Yeah, in a Catholic school. I said, how? And he said, well, all I know is I got there on my own merits. He said, because I haven't done myself any favours. He just said I just kept my head down, didn't discuss it, towed the line. And I was like, and how do you feel about that? He said, well, to be honest, I don't feel too great. I wish that I had been able to fight it a little bit more from the inside. And you hear more and more people go, no, I'm not willing to get my child baptised just to get a place in a school. So I think people are starting to get a little bit braver and kind of say, no, I'm not willing just to toe the line anymore on this.
It's one of the things as well that's quite ironic now is, if you go back to what we were talking about earlier on about the partition of Ireland, and so you had a sectarian Protestant state in Northern Ireland, a sectarian Catholic state here, there were enough Catholics in Northern Ireland to keep Northern Ireland a contested political space, but so few Protestants and even less open atheists in the Republic. So the Republic effectively became an untrammeled Catholic state. But now, because of the dynamics in Northern Ireland, which eventually led to the Good Friday Agreement, there's actually a stronger human rights protection system in Northern Ireland than there is in the Republic of Ireland, because there were enough of the group that were discriminated against there to stand up for their rights, to ensure that something was put in place. Whereas here, the minorities have been so dispersed and so small that it's been very difficult to get the human rights protection, to the extent that most people don't even know what human rights standards are. And they just assume that things are okay, or even the most ridiculous thing in terms of making people swear religious oaths for public office. I mean, that's a human rights violation on a number of levels. One of which is that the state under human rights law isn't allowed to force people directly or indirectly to reveal their religious or non-religious beliefs. But we'd find religious people here will just say, actually, you don't have to mean that part of the oath.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you know, which obviously, if you don't have to mean that part, why would you have to mean any of it? But more importantly, they don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
It's the atheists that take the religious oath seriously.
Far more seriously, yes.
So what you're saying about a two-tiered judicial system, we actually already have it. We have religious judges and judges who are willing to lie. Yeah.
So, which is better.
Which is the better two-tier
I was actually
system.
talking to I remember talking to a senior judge at a dinner once about the issue of people swearing. Just this isn't the official constitutional law. This is just if you're going to court and you're a witness, you have the option of swearing in court. You have an option of swearing a religious oath or a non-religious declaration. Because that's not in the constitution. But again, I was saying, but if you do, I was saying to this judge, I was saying, but if you do that, then you run the risk of biasing religious jurors against you if you say that I want to take the secular affirmation. And he said, well, to be honest, he said, if somebody comes before me and says that they want to take the secular declaration instead of the religious oath, I tend to be biased in their favour.
Well, now that's a whole other controversy.
Yeah. Although the point he was making was that this is somebody who takes the oath seriously.
So is it just a case then that we're just waiting for a critical mass of people who just recognise human rights?
Yeah, maybe a new generation. I mean, who knows how long it's going to take, or who knows? Like we do live through a time where, from the fall of the Berlin Wall onwards, where we've had the end of apartheid in South Africa, we've had the end of the Soviet Union, we've had, Ireland being the first country in the world to legalise marriage equality by popular vote. So we are living through an era where you can have pretty spectacular change pretty quickly. Now, who knows what's going to cause it? It's probably not going to be Atheist Ireland that causes it. It's probably going to be just something in society that triggers it, and it just happens to happen. But when it does happen, all of this work will retrospectively have been useful and have contributed to it.
I think laying the groundwork is very, very important, and I think that was, I suppose, the reason why I was asking about the ethical secular democracy from a grassroots perspective, because I think definitely having a receptive audience, not necessarily a political audience or even in the ruling class, but having that audience ready, even if they're not willing to wear an atheist badge or whatever else, but who are talking to their friends who are maybe more passionate about it or more interested or more knowledgeable.
Yeah, and I think on most of the issues that we're talking about, and I would say even on abortion, which is obviously the most controversial and the one where the Catholic Church is going to really dig in, although they'll dig in on secular education as well. But if you take those two as the areas that are most important to the Catholic Church, abortion and controlling the schools, I think even on both these issues, we're at a stage where if the vote is put to the people, that the people will vote for a secular outcome. But the difficulty is getting the politicians to allow the people to vote on a secular outcome. What they'll probably do is allow the people to vote on some sort of mishmash of compromise of we have to try to balance this, that and the other, and then you'll be faced with, well, it's this or no change at all, so what are you going to vote for?
Are you going to vote for the slightly small change but then enshrine it for the next 20 years or not? It's an interesting one. It's something that's I was actually discussing with somebody today. In a previous life I attempted to set up a political party and failed, but one of the key tenets of that was massive political reform, and one of the things that I wanted to bring back in a reasonable, I was going to say well policed, but well engineered manner, if such a thing exists, was the initiative process. Because I don't like the idea that only politicians can decide what should and should not be voted. Now, I think there are limits to that, and there are some countries who've done it well and others who haven't. But I always worry that somebody else gets to filter what we will ultimately vote in a referendum on. Now, it's a two-way street, I suppose. As it says, there are some jurisdictions, I mean, like California, where they kind of separate and say, well, these things are fundamental and you don't get to vote on them in a popular vote kind of way, and these things you can vote on in a referendum. So yeah, I worry about, because I think that's the more likely outcome. It's not that we wouldn't have, say, a referendum on the Eighth Amendment, or a referendum on, I mean, I think even Labour's initial position, I don't know if it has changed, maybe you can let me know, but I think their initial position was, we're not voting to repeal it, but we're voting to amend it. I don't know, have they already changed on that?
The last, I was at a meeting there the other week, and they were voting to repeal.
Right.
And they have produced a document that they hope could trigger some discussions on legislation where they have said the grounds that they would allow abortion to happen on amidst the predictable areas. That's a whole other day's discussion now about my opinion on it. But they have gone that step.
They have
to
gone. So they have
recommend.
gone from May, where they were talking about amending, all the way to now talking about repealing. But I don't like that they are the only ones who have that control.
Yeah, but it's also that change coincidentally is with an election coming up.
Yes. Well, yes. Maybe we should have elections every year. I don't know, although that would drive, I think, everyone barmy.
I do remember once during that period where it was very, very volatile, and there were 3 elections in 18 months, and there was a housing estate during the third election out in Dublin West, where the Fianna Fáil canvassers were coming back and saying that there's that in this housing estate they were supposed to have had, it was just been built, they're supposed to have had trees landscaping it from a motorway. They haven't got the trees, so they're not going to vote for us. They don't care about the economy, they don't care about immigration, they don't care about unemployment. And so the morning of the by-election, or this was actually a by-election that had been caused because Fianna Fáil gave the European Commissioner's job to a Fine Gael TD so that they could have, they were one seat of a majority, gave the European Commissioner's job to Fine Gael TD to create a by-election that would have given them a one-seat majority instead of minority. So the morning of the by-election, a whole load of council workers came down and planted trees alongside this housing estate. And who knows what effect it had on that particular area's vote. But they lost the by-election, and a few days later they came and took the trees back again. So that's what happens if you have regular elections.
I think I remember that era from watching Reeling in the Years. I think we might have studied it in my history class, in Leaving Cert.
You're not going to last that long as a host if you keep insulting the guests.
You've heard your grandparents tell stories
my grandparents
about it.
often spoke of it.
I remember there was a great hero called Cuchulainn, was it? No, Charlie Hoy.
So that's the ethical society, democracy, ethical secular democracy, and human rights. So I suppose now the word atheism. This again is another. I don't want to say pet peeve of mine. I think it's a pet peeve of most people within the broadly atheist humanist communities. You were talking about trying to get the word to be used more and more. So you mentioned about it being used more in the Dáil in the last year than it was in the previous 15 years.
Well, in the 15 years before Atheist Ireland was founded.
15 years before Atheist Ireland.
It kind of I have stats somewhere on it, but essentially, here we go. It was used. The words atheist and atheism used 63 times in the first 90 years of the Oireachtas, which is about once every year and a half, and 97 times in the 7 years since Atheist Ireland was founded, which is about 14 times a year, and the average for the past 3 years has been 21 times, which is 30 times as often as before we were founded. And so, but it's not just the amount of times, it's also the context. It used to be used as an insult, now it's used just as a descriptive word. But I think the important thing is, a lot of people say, particularly with regard to political campaigning, don't use the word atheism. Don't say you're atheist. You're going to alienate people. Say you're a humanist. Say you're non-religious. Say whatever you want, but don't say atheist. And there is some short-term benefit to that. There's no doubt. But the difficulty with it is, if you keep hiding from the word atheist, all you do is you reinforce that prejudice. And people never see people doing good things while self-identifying as atheists. So I think it's important that both in terms of political advocacy, in terms of our general work, in terms of we're involved in various charitable activities as well. We have a Kiva team that raises money for entrepreneurs in developing countries and so on. So I think it's important that atheists are seen to self-identify as atheists while doing good things. Because, I mean, it's not a terrible word. I mean, all it really means is that, we recognise reality broadly as it is without inventing stories to explain things, and so there's nothing unjustifiable about it. People think that atheism is based on faith, It's not based on faith. Faith is believing things disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. There's considerably more evidence that humans invented the stories of gods than there is that gods actually exist. People believe that atheism is some sort of arrogant claim of certainty. Virtually every atheist I know is happy to say we would change their mind if we got evidence to see that there was a God. We've no vested interest in there being no God. We've no vested interest in there being no afterlife. We've no vested interest in any of these things. It's just where the evidence happens to be leading us. And so we shouldn't be trying to hide from this very reasonable evidence-based approach to reality. And that's why Atheist Ireland promotes atheism and reason as part of what we're doing. We think that an evidence-based naturalistic worldview is better for society than religious worldviews. We think that it gives us a better understanding of reality. We think that it gives us a better understanding of morality, because natural morality is based on things like empathy, compassion, fairness, justice, reciprocity, cooperation, and those natural evolutionary attributes are corrupted by religious instructions of, even if this is the compassionate thing to do, you shouldn't do it because somebody wrote something in a book 2,000 years ago. So we think that it's important that we are unashamedly promoting an atheistic, naturalistic, ethical worldview. And then the second part of our work in terms of an ethical secular society, on that issue, we're not looking for the state to support our atheism. We would be just as opposed to the state supporting atheism as we are to the state supporting religion. But within society, we think it's very important that we don't hide from the word atheist.
So what you're saying is it's a religion.
Yeah, it's a religion, and also we have meals every Sunday. So clearly we believe in the afterlife.
Yes, absolutely, definitely.
And sometimes we sing songs. I don't know.
It's practically
in the same.
It's practically Scientology.
It's either a religion or a football team, one or the other.
And I hate both. I agree with your take that we should definitely not hide from the word atheist or atheism in general. And I know David Silverman in the States has pushed this an awful lot. I also think the cultural context in which he is pushing this is significantly different in terms of the amount of outrage that there still is in the States against atheists and the whole concept. And I definitely don't think that outrage is quite as strong here. I don't have a problem using the label to other people. For me, and I do it all the time, and as I said, I would agree that we should hide from it. However, I've had this discussion with a lot of friends of mine who are atheist by definition of what they of that they don't believe, but they also would be I would say they're on the path towards valuing evidence and reason more than so I use the word faithism or faithist to describe someone who values faith and opinion more than evidence and reason. And then we are evidentialists, atheists, humanists, whatever term, who value reason and evidence more. I think that valuing of reason and evidence more is the key thing, because as we all know, that once you do that, then atheism is the natural conclusion. And I have wondered, could we create another word, not brights, not to replace atheism, because I wouldn't do that. I'd put it in addition to atheism, and maybe it is humanism, I don't know. But where those friends of mine who just, not because they're afraid of the label of atheism, but they just don't think it encompasses the way, it's not enough to encompass the way they're thinking. Is there another word we could use in addition to atheism and promote that as clearly identifying that kind of valuing of evidence?
Well, I mean, it's part of your identity. Obviously, it's not your entire identity.
Yeah.
The difficulty with humanism is that they're religious humanists. You could say atheist humanist if you want, but I don't think you need to complicate things. I think in terms of most people, whatever the nuance, and there's almost theological or atheological debates within atheism about what the word atheism means.
Yeah.
But more or less, most people know what you're talking about if you say you're an atheist. If you say you're a humanist, some people think, are they the people that don't wear any clothes? You know, so I mean, it's like most people know roughly what atheism is. So I prefer to use atheism for that reason. I would also consider myself a humanist as a limited part of my other ethical attributes. I think humanist is is a bit speciesist, because I don't think that humans are more important than non-human animals. So if there was a word that characterized respect for all sentient conscious beings, I'd be happy to go with that as well as atheism. But I do think the atheism
vegan.
It is vegan as well.
Veganism. That's so you're. A vegan.
I'm a
humanist,
multiple
atheist,
minority.
secularist.
Veganist. Unfortunately,
If only you were gay.
That's right. I am heterosexual, but as Ashling says, I'm a lead supporter.
Right.
So that's
which is probably the biggest burden
it is.
of them all to
That's
carry.
That's a much bigger burden than being gay.
In fairness.
Where's Michael's equality referendum?
No marriage equality for you. Absolutely not.
Yes, no, we need a referendum for equality for Leeds United supporters.
What about rationalist as a word?
Yeah, I've been looking at the words rationalist and evidentialist, and evidentialist exists within the philosophical context and philosophy as an academic subject, and it does almost describe what I'm talking about. I think the only one of the problems is it's not that well known. So I understand the argument coming from the familiarity of the term, but I would also argue that terms become what people want them to mean if they're used in a particular context again and again and again, like the word gay now as opposed to pre-50s.
Well, what we use in Atheist Ireland as in our constitution, I mean, our aims are promoting atheism, reason, and ethical secularism. Yeah. So I mean, that's it in a nutshell for us, and that captures quite a lot in 4 words.
Because I know you
5 words if you can't and. there was a guy
pedantic you can add to the list.
6 words. There was a guy in Dublin years ago called Henry Moore, and he was the Earl of Drogheda. And he used to own a whole other land around the city centre in Dublin at the time. And O'Connell Street, which used to be Sackville Street, previous to that used to be Drogheda Street. And so this guy called 4 of the roads, Henry Street, Moore Street, Earl Street and Drogheda Street, to name the 4 roads after him, Henry Moore, Earl of Drogheda. And there's a little lane called Henry Place just behind, if you go down Henry Street, just behind the amusement arcade on O'Connell Street, down by the Spire, and it's currently called Henry Place, but that guy at the time called that lane of Lane, so we would have streets named Henry Moore, Earl of Drogheda.
Well, now that's pedantic to a whole new level.
I so slightly egotistical.
A little. I had no idea, actually. I knew about Sackville Street. I didn't realise Drogheda Street.
Yeah, I remember that's another little pedantic anecdote on, I think it might have been QI. It was one of those programs or other, and somebody accused Lee Mack criticised somebody for saying something that was ever so slightly wrong, and somebody said to him, I say we've the president of the Pedantic Society here, and Lee Mack instantly shot back, vice president actually. So the word atheism then, you Atheist Ireland would very much like to have that used. Given that we obviously are seeing an increase in use, maybe in political language and in a less negative context, more in a descriptive context. Do you think that there's other places in which it could be used or needs to be used again in a more positive context? I mean, outside of maybe in churches and stuff like that, which I suspected. Well, the media generally, I suppose. Yeah. But I mean, it's no longer unusual now to have, a either print or broadcast interview with a representative of Atheist Ireland. That would have been considered unheard of, essentially. Or let's put it this way: initially, when we started off and we had those interviews, they would always be prefaced by, and can you tell us what atheism is? Right, and so on. Whereas now it's just accepted as it's part of the discourse. People know, roughly speaking, that there are atheists in Ireland, that there is an organisation called Atheist Ireland. We don't represent all atheists, just as no group represents all the people that are associated with the name. But we broadly reflect the views of our members, which broadly represent a naturalistic, rational, evidence-based approach to both ethics and public life.
Okay. So then the second... that was the second of your
Well, if we'd simply working backwards up to 5 to number one.
Number one.
But before we reach number one, we're still at number two.
Still at number two. Still at number two.
Yeah. So in at 2, it's just basically being nice. And but particularly when you're online.
No, you've crossed the line these days, so no. And that's definitely just being a religion. It's not just Christianity.
It's almost the opposite to Christianity. It's do let your compassion guide you, rather than don't let your compassion guide you. But it's essentially just saying that we can robustly debate issues that we seriously disagree on, and we don't have to pull back from that. We don't have to try to compromise or try to come up with something that suits everybody. We can argue for what we think is right for society, and other people can argue for what they think is right, but we can do that without personalising it. We don't have to have a go at people individually, and particularly online where you're dealing with people that you're not sitting face to face with. Like here, if we were doing this over Skype, we might be a little more personal with each other,
a little bit.
But what you can do online, just recognise that you're dealing with real people. Don't just lash out with the first thing that comes into your head. Try to recognise that the other person has feelings, believes what they believe just as legitimately as you believe what you believe, and that's it's quite common in online debate, unfortunately, and in the atheist and secular areas over the last few years. There's been quite a few outbreaks of people just ignoring that and just almost, you would almost suspect that they are knowingly causing conflict where it's not necessary. And it's just I'm beginning to sound like a priest here. Is it that except I mean it. So that's the first. It's just debate things robustly. But recognise that you're dealing with actual people who have feelings.
I think, again, when you and I had discussed, Ashling, the abortion, the question of abortion, when you were educating me on some of those issues, one of the frustrations that I expressed at the time was Ireland's inability to come at this question from. So I immediately had no problem dismissing anything that was already coming from religious or fatheistic basis, irrespective of whether it is religious or just ideological, whatever. I had no problem just dismissing that. But even if you took all of that out, I was finding it difficult to have a rational or evidence-based conversation just with friends and family and whatever else. Because they immediately just want to shut down. We don't talk about this, we don't talk about that. And I'm like, no, this is a very important question. I'd like to talk about it. I don't know what my ideas are on it. I'd like to know what your ideas are on and how you got to it. And I think what you're talking about here has a very, very important message for everybody in Ireland, that if we can get people, as you said, to adhere to not vehemently character assassinating at the first opportune moment, and instead recognise that the other person is as passionate about their view. But I don't like the term debate. I think there is a time and a place for debates, but I prefer discussion, because I think of scientists having a discussion where they're willing to change their mind on a position, where they know that there might not be two sides, there might be 20 sides to it, and that they value changing their mind and admitting they're wrong if the evidence suggests that they go in that direction, rather than I'm trying to change your mind and you're trying to change my mind and we're not going to get anywhere. I don't know if we can encourage more of that.
I think there's a big difference though between the type of discussion you're talking about around abortion in Ireland, because there's a complete lack of maturity in a lot of those discussions, because people are terrified of the issue still. I think we should have higher expectations for the people in the atheist community that we're dealing with online, because we've just used all those words a few minutes ago to describe what we think atheists should be: rationalist, humanist. We should have a higher expectation that people should be able to engage in intelligent dialogue with us without resorting to name calling or threats or doxing, which is if you go under a fake name, that they'll release your personal details and could end up getting you fired from a job. I think lying is very, very common. I've come across it myself in online discussions, and when you call people out on their lies, they simply just block you So I think we are right to have higher expectations of the people we're engaging with.
I would agree with that. I do get perhaps more disappointed when I find out that a so-called evidentialist, rationalist, atheist, whatever, is actually completely ignoring the very values that they would be expected to be promoting, if indeed that's how they got to their atheism or whatever. So,
and the very values that if it was a religious person they were in a discussion with and they were carrying on the way that they carry on, they would call them out very, very strongly, very, very quickly. So it's not that they don't recognise it; they know it. They just don't see it when it's within their own. And
I mean, while I would have some measure of forgiveness for us all for. And now we're really getting into the priesty thing here, but I'd have some measure of forgiveness.
Now, forgiveness is okay as long as you don't stray into salvation.
right. Our absolution. I would have some measure of forgiveness for all of us for not recognising within ourselves, which is why in science we have the peer review process to try and keep us on the straight and narrow. So I think when people do point out, look, I think maybe you're wrong here, or did you go down?
And show you the evidence. And they can actually present you with the evidence, and you put your hands over your ears and go, la 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 la. I don't want to hear that. I'm going to block you.
But it's also, it does go considerably beyond that. In recent years, in the atheist secular community, we have had the Feringula blog, where P.Z. Myers, who for years was scathing of creationists, and I think got a free ride on that because he was able to justify his personal attacks on them, or not so much justify, but accompany his personal attacks with fact-based, support on the arguments that we're having. But he has since built up a following on his blog of commenters who, for a long time, were encouraged, to tell people to go and fuck themselves with a decaying porcupine. And with a rusty chainsaw and things like that, and it's just like it goes way beyond, just not being ethical and kind in your discussion. It goes into absolutely, revolting attacks that are designed to intimidate people and to close down discussions. And so I think we've got to recognise that it's not merely that people are not behaving as well as they might. It's that there are some prominent people who at one time had influence. Thankfully he doesn't have the influence that he used to have, but there are some people that at one time had influence that were actively encouraging hateful behaviour, that were listing people that they said they hate and despised and held in contempt, and that were joking about stabbing people and shooting people out of the sky in balloons and stuff like that, and just stuff that's well out of order, but almost reached the stage that it was normalised. And I think it's very important that you stand up to that sort of behaviour and say, no, that's not acceptable behaviour within either an online or real life community.
I have to say that I've been trying more and more to distance or to separate or detach ideas that I may disagree with from the people who are putting them forth. Even if the person says, I believe this or I think that, if I'm responding, I try to take a moment to change the language, even the language that they've used, and go, I don't think that concept is correct, or here's why I disagree with the logic of that idea. In a deliberate attempt to try and get them to separate themselves from the idea. And I don't always succeed in this. I don't know if that's maybe one way of approaching this is to try and deal with the ideas rather than with the people, unless of course you're being pulled into it deliberately, which obviously in some of the examples that you cited, people were definitely being pulled into it deliberately. But I wonder if we can work together as a community towards that end goal of always challenging the concept, even if someone tries to pull you into the individual who's expressing the concept.
Well, we have a phrase in Atheist Ireland which is you have rights, your beliefs don't. And what we mean essentially by that is we respect an individual's right to believe whatever it is that they believe, even if they believe it for bad reasons or for what we consider to be bad reasons. Who knows, we may be wrong and they may be right. So we respect the individual person, but we will robustly discuss the ideas that they have and the beliefs that they have. And if we can separate those two things and say, let's, as you put it, let's look at the ideas, let's look at the criteria by which we'll examine the ideas, and part of that criteria is we're not going to attack you personally. So I think that is, I agree with you, that is probably the approach to take.
What this looks like in prison then. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners, even defend the tactics that are used to